So here's the link. So someone should please kind of just stay on it, so we can be sure that it still, it still works. So we don't wander off. Okay, so basically, um, in JavaScript, you can actually have a lot of blocks of code, like more like when you have something like a function, and then don't worry about the functions. Okay, let me just do an anonymous function. Let's say console log, sorry. So when you have this, then maybe inside of the same function you can actually have alert. Then so basically it is okay to say that this is this is a fragment of this code, this is another fragment of this code, then all together we have a block of code. Then at the top here I can also decide to declare a variable and call this variable my var. Declare initialize the variable without a value, and call it my var. Then decide to now add you know sorry decide to give a value, assign a value to the variable and call the value, this. So all of these are, this is one, line, this is another line, this is the other line, this is another line. So basically, we can refer to this particular, line, as a JavaScript expression. An expression is just like, it's basically a code that produces a value. So it can be something so simple as just saying var equals 5. So this is basically an expression. And then if you did mathematics in school, you kind of just have the word expression all over the place where you are doing things like algebra, because whenever I say something like x plus y equals z, that's basically an expression. So an expression is just more like the smallest fragment of your code, and then you basically might not be able to make any sense of an expression. Then the inverse, or maybe the higher level of what you have as an expression, is basically a statement. And what a statement is that a statement is a collection of expressions. So with a statement you can actually make sense out of your program. So for instance, a statement could be initializing a variable, you get the point. Then I am assigning a value to it, then deciding to log that value out and say my var. Now we can make sense out of it that okay, we initialize a variable here, we assign a value to it, and here we are logging it out. So we can refer to that as a complete statement. Does that make sense? But just saying my var and this is everything about the program, this doesn't make so much sense. So like an expression is just like one fragment, or it's the smallest fragment of the code that you can actually divide. Like you can divide it up to the point of just saying 5. It is as divisible as the smallest part of your program. Meanwhile a statement is that part of the program that you can make sense out of. So I think the closest analogy to help you understand the difference between an expression and a statement is basically the fact that you can refer to an expression as something like a clause or a phrase in English language. A clause is just more like a part of a sentence, but it is not an entire sentence, and you hardly make sense out of a clause. Just more like saying things like if I do, like if I do, then what will happen if you do, or maybe may I, that kind of thing. Like if I say may I, and I know maybe elasticity comes to mind, but if I say may I, like you hardly make sense out of it, except for maybe nowadays when most of these things have actually been used in comedy and all of those stuff. Then you can easily relate when I'm talking about. There's a way you can actually break down a sentence and remove a part of a sentence, and then you speak it out in an attempt to communicate, and nobody can actually understand what you're saying, and your statement don't, and your words don't actually make any sense to whoever is listening. So that's what I mean by that. So basically I think this is not something we abide on so much. So we just have, an expression is like more like the smallest fragment of your code, while a statement is a collection of expression that you can actually make sense out of. So that's basically the difference. So let's go on to what we have today. So let's now start dealing with primitive and non-primitive data types, and this might actually lead us into some complex things. So like we've seen before, the primitive data types are what we already know: the strings, the number, boolean, empty values. Then we also have we have big int, but I don't want to deal with that. Then we also have symbol, but let's just keep this the way it is for now. So empty values should be null and undefined. So these are primitive, and the reason why they are called primitive values is actually because, and like I said before, you cannot alter their, you cannot alter them. So what I mean by you can't alter them is, let's say I declare a variable here using the var keyword, and I say my var, that is the name of the variable, and I decide my var is going to be equal to, what's it called? Maybe my name. So okay, let me just say the variable is my name instead of my var to make more sense out of it. So this is it. Then I say console.log my name. So here now, let me open this with live server, and when I open the console, but mind you, this is not the only way I can actually run JavaScript, but I just decided to run it here. So doesn't mean I can only run it inside the browser. Visual Studio Code has its own console, and I can decide to also run it inside the Visual Studio Code console. And it's going to do the same. You can see it logs out the same way. So, but we are not doing that. Let's just stick to the browser for now. So, so we have my name here. So there's something in JavaScript that in JavaScript referred to as methods, and these methods basically are properties pertaining to specific data types. And what this method does is that they allow you operate further on that particular data. So you remember yesterday when we consoled, when we logged our array and object inside of the Chrome developer tool, when we outputted it to the console, you remember that whenever I opened, like try to expand the object or the array, you would see an additional property that we did not necessarily write. It's called a prototype. You could actually see it on the object inside of the console, and let me just show you what I mean by that. So let me remove this comment from here, and instead of using the dot notation the console on this, let me just output the value. So you can see here that we have something called a prototype, and this prototype is just basically they are referred to as what you have in this prototype are also properties of this object we create. But we have two types of property that a primitive type, non-primitive type can have. We have static properties, and we have more like an instantaneous kind of property, more like a property that is pertaining to the instance that we defined. So the properties we added by ourselves. So in that case, we refer to these properties on this particular object, like okay, the username, the email. We define all of these properties, and the properties come in key value pair. So there's a key of the property, then there's a value of the property. So we define these properties, so they are instant properties. They are instance of this object. But we have static properties that we didn't necessarily create, but by right, every JavaScript primitive data type have their own static property, and they are able to use this static property. And it will begin to interest you when we start using these static properties on various kind of data, for you to see how how helpful they can be. So most of these are basically methods. And remember, while we were closing the class yesterday, I said methods are basically functions that are properties of an object. And I know you might not understand that yet, because we don't understand what a function is at this point in time. So now we have a primitive data type like this. I'm sorry, a primitive data type, and a primitive data type basically does not have any property to them other than what you have defined. So they hold only a single value. So that's one of the things you have to keep in mind. Primitive data types. And if you're not getting it, this is a very good time for you to be able to call me and ask me whatever question what you're not getting before I proceed. And I would appreciate that if you can do that for me, please. Hello.
I hear so.
Are you getting it and it's not sinking in?
So far, so good for me. It's okay.
Is it okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
For
sir.
me,
Though, like it's
I
okay
still
for
methods like
yeah.
I don't think I'm in the concept of method.
Huh?
You talked about methods.
Yeah.
I still don't get the concept. Like,
Okay,
I
don't
don't
worry.
think
You are going to get it in a bit, but let's take it slowly. So for primitive data type, like I said, they will only hold a single value, and that single value you cannot alter. So what I mean by alter that value, to alter something actually means to change the state of that thing, right? So that's what I mean by to alter it. You get the point. So what I mean by to alter it means, like I said before, when we talk about methods that you can actually apply on a particular data type, because the data type actually, for instance, you've seen before that when we have a particular data type, it kind of limits us to the kind of operations we can perform on that particular data type. Is that correct? Like for instance, we can't do something like okay, for instance, a string, maybe like this string is, this is a string, my name, and another string is maybe my state, and I say my state is Ogun State. So it will not make sense for me to decide to do something like this, my name times my state, right? That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So it gives me what? Not a number. In other words, this is rubbish. How can the computer resolve multiplying this string of text and this string of text together? It doesn't happen, right? So because this is a string data type, I'm kind of limited to what kind of operations I can perform on them, right? So but that means we can still perform some operations on a string, just that we are limited, and that limitation is based on, it varies from one data type to the other. Is that correct for everybody? Like, can you relate with that?
yes, sir.
Okay. So now when we talk about, we've dealt with different kind of operators and how we can actually use these operators on our data. So now I'm going to be showing you some kind of extra operations we can actually carry out on our data. So one of them that we can carry out on a string, and let me just remove the second variable I declared, is some additional methods. And remember I said before that primitive types like strings, boolean, numbers, null, undefined don't have methods, but there's something that is called autoboxing of primitive types, and that's a JavaScript feature that actually makes certain things possible that shouldn't have been possible. So we'll look at that in a bit. So, and what does is that it actually makes methods available to primitive types. So one of those methods, just to show you that primitive types cannot be altered, that is why I'm introducing this, and it's quite early for me to introduce that, but I just want to introduce it. So for instance, we have a string, and there's a method available in JavaScript that enables us, because this string, for instance, let me just turn everything to a lowercase word. So everything is in a lower cap, that is, it's small letters. So I can actually decide to convert everything to capital letters using JavaScript, pure JavaScript. And the way I do that is by using one of the methods available inbuilt into JavaScript. And what I can do in that case is by saying, my name dot to uppercase. And you can see I actually get a text, and it says what this method, you can see it says it is a method, and what this method does is that it converts all alphabetic characters into a string, in a string to uppercase. Does that make sense? So this method is built into JavaScript. We didn't create it. It is a part of JavaScript. So now let me go on. You can see that getting this, this definition from our VS Code, is actually a suggestion that what we are doing is correct. And by default, when we log this out, my name is supposed to be capital letters, right? So let's see that. You can see that what we have here is still in small caps. And let me just remove this object. And I'm getting so angry at, let me just open Safari, please. Because of all these extra stuffs getting logged into the console, I don't need them to get logged into the console. So let me close this and then open them. Use Safari to kind of just to do this. And Safari is another headache on its own. Let me just, because I don't think Safari actually allows you to. Okay, maybe not Safari, and I don't have any other browser here. What do I do? Okay, let's just manage it. I'm not supposed to be getting all of those stuffs I'm getting in the console, and it is so annoying. Let me just visit it back, because Safari is not the best at developer tools. So maybe I might just decide to download. Do I have Brave browser on this computer? Okay, so on my other computer I have a Brave browser. I don't have it here. I don't. So let's manage it in the meantime. So let me open my console. So Chrome has been rejected, but now we just have to fall back to it. I hope it doesn't get angry. So we have this. I'm trying to find out which particular extension is making this thing happen. Okay, that doesn't make sense. So you can see my console, right? So let me kind of make it bigger. So this is the output all already. So by default, what we are supposed to have here, we are supposed to have, a capital, version of this. And if I should do something else, like, remember I said what we are trying to do is that primitive value hold a single value and they cannot be altered. The only way to actually change what we assign to this variable is by changing what we assign to it. We cannot alter what we assign to it. This particular data is in memory and we cannot alter it because it is a primitive type. So the only other thing we can do is by saying my name equals, and what this does is it assigns a new value entirely to that variable. So we cannot alter it, and you can see now that we have all caps, right? Everything is now in capital letter. So because this is hello,
I want to ask a question.
okay.
Okay, so yesterday when you were explaining, there was one, I think we were talking about, you said JavaScript runs from top to bottom, right? So yeah, if we put var my name is equal to Ololade, and we put my name dot, is it because the dot to change it to uppercase is there? That's why it is not embedding, it's not changing to Ololade. It's not changing to capital letter.
You mean initially?
Yes.
Okay, initially, remember what I said. Don't mistake the variable for the value. The variable, remember, is a box. The value is the content, right? So this content is a primitive data type and it cannot be altered. Do you get the point? So if you store 2 in memory, that 2 will be 2 in memory until you destroy it by creating a new value that replaces it. But that 2 in particular cannot be changed. Does that make sense? You can add that 2 to another number to create a new number. You can add this string to another one to create a new string. But this particular string, being a primitive type, cannot be altered. And you will see what I mean by cannot be altered, because for object and arrays and other data types, you can actually alter them and do whatever we see fit to them. You get the point? But this particular one. So what we do here, remember what we are doing here is basically reassigning. We are not redeclaring, we are not reinitializing, we are reassigning. And what JavaScript sees here is that we reassign a new value. This value and this are no longer the same. As far as this is concerned, it cannot be altered. So If we don't use this assignment operator, it will be trying to alter this particular value, and JavaScript will not allow you alter a primitive type. So that's why it is not working. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So understand that primitive value types cannot be altered, while non-primitive value types can be altered. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. Then primitive value types don't have method. This to uppercase is actually a method. It is as though, and let me tell you one thing. Remember when I talked about the dot notation? In order for you to be able to use the dot notation, that particular what's it called? Jesus. That particular method has to be a property of this value. Does that make sense? So, but we of course know that when we console.log my name, for instance, and I hope you get this, I just really hope you get this. You can see that we have my name here. On line 259, you can see this is the output. And you can see that it does not hold anything else. Does that make sense? Unlike when we did a console.log of our object, you can actually see that other than what we created as the property of our object here, we could actually see some additional things like spices that JavaScript actually added for us, and that is inside this prototype object. And inside this prototype object, you can actually see a wide variety of methods, which is what they are all static properties. You remember what I said about static properties? Static properties are basically properties that are common to all data types, to all similar data types. So when you have 10 objects, all of those 10 objects have similar static data and properties. Does that make sense? But we have instance properties that are peculiar to this particular object I created, and those are the custom properties that I defined on that particular object. Does that make sense? But other than that, JavaScript appends a prototype which contains a wide range of other methods and useful things that we can use on this particular object. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, but for a string, you can actually see that the string is just the string. JavaScript did not add anything to for it to us. So the way we are able to use methods like to uppercase and some other methods, string methods that we have, which I will show you a couple of them, in JavaScript, is because JavaScript has something called autoboxing, of primitive types. And this autoboxing, actually wraps your primitive data type inside of an enclosing object. You don't normally see that object, but whenever you need to use a method on that primitive data type, that object gets activated. Does that make sense? So let me just call, So you might want to take note of that and research more around it. It will help you a lot. Because you might want to ask the question, I said primitive data types, have single value. And where is the to uppercase coming from? Because to uppercase, when we say dot to uppercase, this dot actually means what is after the dot is a property of the string. But the string doesn't have a property. Does that make sense? Strings don't have properties. They don't have methods. They don't have prototypes. What they have is just a single value, and that is the value you assign to them. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you for the feedback. Okay, so there's another method. So let me just kind of create another string so I can get rid of this, right? So I hope you took note of the word autoboxing, right?
I didn't hear that, sir.
Okay, autoboxing.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, autoboxing is just a wrapper for primitive. So that's what it is. It's more like a wrapper, and that wrapper is basically an object. Does that make sense? So okay, for instance, and I don't want to go into this, but let me just try. So we have, let me do console.log. There's an object in JavaScript known as the string object. This string object, it is one of the expressions of this autoboxing. So whenever you create a string, JavaScript actually uses this wrapper and wraps it around your string, and that way your string automatically becomes a property of this string object. And let me do this. So you can see that we have on line 262, you can see that we have this, it is a native code and it is a string. It's more like it is a function, it is a method basically. So what it is in the actual sense, it is that it is actually, it is meant to wrap your primitive string type, and it is because of this, this native string, object wrapping your primitive string type, that is why you have access to string, methods like to uppercase. And there's another kind of string method that I just want you to know. So you remember this, we couldn't alter this, so the only way to alter this is to reassign. So we are not altering it basically, we are what we are doing is we are, kind of reassigning that new value to it, and you can see that now we have the two uppercase on the line. So another thing we can do is another method we can have, and let me just make this, string longer. So that's the new string. Now you can see everything is now in, capital letters. So what we can do, another string method we can use is, there's another string method called, my name dot substring. And what substring does is that it gets a particular part of the string for you. So you can decide to get, remember when I said arrows are zero index based, you remember? That is when you are counting the elements of an array, you start from 0, not 1, right?
Yes.
Yes, so when you want to use this substring method as well, you start from 0. So 0 happens to be the very first character inside of that string, and in this case it is going to be what? The letter O, right? So the start number will be the first parameter, and don't worry about parameters now, or the first argument. Then the end number will be the last argument. So when I save this, basically, is somebody yawning?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so basically you see that we don't see anything basically, but if I decide to reassign this and I say my name, I can see that the value of my name will no longer be this to uppercase and my name, but it's going to be the substring. So you can see we actually have, the string from the index of, 0 to the index of, what's it called, 4. Hello. Oh, I'm guessing, okay, this is not, okay, 0 based index actually. So it starts from 0 and ends on 4. So I think 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, yeah, that's what it does. So 0, 1, 2, 3. So in as much as we said we want it to stop at, we want it to pick 4 elements, so it stops at the index of 4. So what it does is, the start number is 0 and the end number is 4. So it starts at the 0th element. So if I decide to start at 1, see what is going to happen. It's going to skip the very first. You can see it turns it to lol. So it skips the, the first element, which is supposed to be at the 0 index. And don't worry about all of this, since you will understand everything about, methods. So in order for you to be able to understand clearly what methods are, we are going to be doing something, and the next thing we are going to be doing is functions basically. But before we go into functions, let me just show you how you can actually alter, a non-primitive data type like an array, for instance. So from here, I'm actually going to create a new variable. Let me just use the let keyword, and I'm going to say my array. And my array is going to have a couple of things. So let me just put the number 1, 2, 3, 4. Sorry, but let me put 5 just to show you the kind of things we can do. So let me do console.log, and when I save it, you can see that we have 4 elements, and the first element is at the 0 index, then the last one is at the 3rd index. So we have 0, 1, we have 1, 2, 3, 5. So there's no 4 basically, and the length of the array is what? 4, 4. Then one of the things we can first do, you can see that we actually have a length property attached to this array. And remember when I said array actually behaves, it is an object basically, but you can also treat it like an object. So if I see, because this property is available in our array, so when I do something, and when I say dot length, and see what is going to happen, it is going to console.log the length of our array, which is that 4 that we saw initially. Do you understand that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so this makes sense to you, right? We are accessing, one of the properties available, because we are now dealing with a non-primitive data type. Now there are a lot of properties available to us just naturally without any, wrapper, an autobox wrapper, autoboxing wrapper, or what you call it. So now another thing we can actually do here is we can decide to append value into our array. We can do push then what we can push, you can push a new value to our array, and what this will do is what it will append a new element to the end of the array. So when I save this, you are going to see an array of 5 elements. What is that? Console.log my array. Sorry, this is not what we want to do basically. So let me come here and do my push method here, and let me console.log my array, and let's save it. So you can see that we have 5 elements here now. We now have what? 1 2 3 4 5. Sorry, 1 2 3 5 4. Remember, 5 is not 4 is not in the original array, but we are able to what? Put it inside of the array. So you see, we are altering this. We are not reassigning it. We can alter it directly. It is a non-primitive data type. Does that make sense to you? Unlike the string that we have to redeclare in order to be able to update it, but this one we can alter the original value and it will be fine. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. But why didn't you arrange it accordingly, like 1 2 3 4 5?
I just trying to show you. So
That.
one of the things I want to do to you is that instead of push, we have another what's it called, array method that we can actually use to put an element in a particular index. Does that make sense?
Sir, please, can you explain this, my array dot push again? It's a bit unclear.
Okay, array.push actually appends a new element to the end of an array. So whatever array you have, once you do array.push, whatever you put inside of the parentheses, it could be a string, it could be anything, is going to get added to the end of that array, as you can see. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And remember I said arrow, we can use the bracket notation with an array, right? I can see the array at the index of, so we have 0 1 2 0 1 2, sorry, 0 1 2, yeah. So we can see at the index of 3. So we want to assign a value to that. I want to say, just to make it clear. So you can see that at the 3rd index, we're able to replace what was there, and we added a new value. We are altering the, I don't know if that makes sense to you. And you see that we are not actually reassigning. Does that make sense? Because if we were reassigning, the new value would have been a string, right? We are using a bracket notation to access what is at the 3rd index, because this is the 0th index, this is the 1st index, this is the 2nd one, this is the 3rd one. So it's replacing what's on the 3rd index with what? The string, word string. So I can actually make this 4, for instance, and then we're going to have 0 1 2 3 4. And remember, the original array doesn't look like that, but we are able to alter that value and it's just fine. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Any question?
Sir, I noticed that the 5 disappeared.
Which what? Yeah, because basically we
5.
replaced what is on the 3rd index. So if 5 is what's on the 3rd index, then 5 is going to take the hit. So it gets, we take it out. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay, is everybody clear on that now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so there's another array method, and this array method is basically, and I just want to show you a couple of them. We don't have to master array methods now. I'm just showing you that you can actually alter, and this is the last one we're probably going to do. So we can do array.join, and then you can see that a string is used to separate one element of the array from the next, in the resulting string. If omitted, the array elements are separated with a comma. Does that make sense? So what this does basically is that it's going to actually it's going to join it's going to join your array together. Like it can actually join a set of strings together if you pass them into an array like that. So another method we have, I think that is splice. So that's if you want to remove something from a specific index and then add another one. So there are actually a lot of them, so we are not going to be this is not an array method class, but I'm just trying to explain the concept of methods to you. And if you look at the prototype of this array, for instance, you are going to see that all of these things we've been using actually exist inside of an array. You can see which ones did we use. We used push. So you can see we have push here, right? So you can see it's a part of the static properties of the array. Then we also have join. I just talked about join now. So this is join. So there you can see that we actually have a lot of them, right? So let me just show you concat. So let's say we have two arrays, for instance. So let's say my array 2 equals, okay, let me change this to 4, for instance. I'm just trying to keep everything simple. So let me change this to 5, 6, 7, 8. So if I do array dot, my array dot concat, then I pass in, the new array, my array 2. Sorry. So what we do basically here is that basically what we are doing is we are creating a new array. So what we can do here, so you can see that we are actually performing an operation on this array. We are adding the two of them together. So let's say so you can see now we have an array of 8 elements. So the two arrays have been added together. Does that make sense? So these are all the methods you can actually use, and these are possible on an array in particular because of the prototype object, where you actually have a lot of methods that are available to you. And basically, like I said before, methods are actually when a case where you have methods when the property of a particular object is a function, not just a string or a boolean or any of those primitive types. When the property is actually a function, we have key value. If the value of the property is a function, then we refer to it as a method in JavaScript. Does that make sense? So we revisit this much later, but now I think it's a good time for actually for us to be able to explore the subject of functions, and I'm just so tired right now. So we have functions. So functions are basically the building blocks of almost every program. Like at the top level of every program is going to be a function or the other, because function actually allow you to create a block of code that you can always reuse anywhere inside of your program, or create a block of code so that you don't have to rewrite the same program over and over again. Then you can always use that particular program, if that particular function, whenever you need to do something. So a very good example, and just to start by just like when we're going to declare variables, we learned about the var keyword, the let keyword, the const keyword. So the keyword to actually declare a function is the function keyword. So the next thing you want to write is the name of the function. So say function, and then you want to put a parenthesis. Then after that you want to put a curly brace. So inside of here, what you're going to do is you can write any block of code and it's going to be just fine. So let's say we just want to console log my function inside of the what's it called, and you can see that nothing actually happens in our browser at the moment. So I think what I need to do to actually solve this crazy problem is to enable autosave. So when I enable autosave, I think I won't be getting that. So I actually disabled autosave because of the questions I might be asking in between. So I'll be able to just ask you. So you can see that nothing actually happens at the moment. It doesn't solve anything. So let me just remove it. So it happens to be happening whenever the browser reloads. So let me just let me remove that. It doesn't fix the problem. So you can see that nothing happens when we reload our page. We don't get any output into the browser. We basically not getting anything. So how do we access the code that we put inside of a function? That is the question. So the way we access a code put inside of the function is by simply invoking the function. And the way you invoke the function is by calling the function name like this, then using the parenthesis symbol. So when I do this, I basically call the function. So whenever the browser reloads, the function is going to get executed. I can see as the function gets executed, we are able to access the code inside of the function. So you can see we have this item console logged into our console. Does that make sense?
So is it that with this one, the function is not assigned a variable?
The function is basically a variable.
Okay.
But the value that is attached to the data type attached to it is a function. So the function itself is a data type.
Okay.
So if I'm coming. So let's do something. So basically, oh, my phone. I'm not trying to input. So you can see we actually have the function here, you know, and it comes out because we can actually, it's actually a value. Can you see that? You can actually log it out, into the console. Does that make sense? So, but basically, the way we declare a function is not the same way we declare a regular variable. More like we cannot say, and there's another syntax to actually initiating a function, but this is the legacy, this is the legacy way of initiating a function or initializing a function. So this is the way that we're going to be learning for now. But in ES6, there's something referred to as the arrow function, but we won't be talking about that now. So just understand that this is a JavaScript function, and the function is a variable, and you can actually decide to do a lot of dynamic things to a function that So basically, so this is a function, but this kind of function doesn't necessarily it doesn't solve any problem for us, right? So basically, let's try and do something different with the function. So inside of a function, we can also decide to declare a variable and call this variable maybe what's it called, maybe price x. Yeah, so let's say price x. So let's just do a simple price calculator. So price x is going to be, let's say, probably $20, and let's say let price y equal to 40. So what we can do here is, inside of our function, we can decide to do something like price x plus price y, and we assign that to a new variable called costs. Does that make sense? So now we can, instead of logging my function into the console, we can now decide to log cost, not const. Is that cost? Yeah. So you can see that inside of we are still logging out our function into the console, but that's not what we want to do. So let's just invoke our function. And how do we invoke it again? By using a parenthesis, you remember. So when we do this, you can see that we actually get the sum of the two values we are adding together, price x plus price y. So you can see that is working now. But does that make sense to everybody?
Yes,
So
sir.
the total we got, that's this 60. Is it because you called a new func name, or because you remove the console.log?
Okay, even if I don't log it into the console, JavaScript will still proceed to execute this line. It's still going to add it, just that we are not accessing it. So we use the console.log to actually access it. There are many other ways to access it. Even if we don't use console.log, we can decide to use alert. Does that make sense? And it's still alert, gives us the value. So we can output it the same way. You can actually decide to output this into your browser, maybe like document.write. I can see it kind of just write it on in our page. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah, so you can do a lot of things. So whether or not you decide to output your value, your function still goes on to return. So I can decide to also return it, which I don't want to come to this here. So let's keep it the way it is for now. So let me do a console.log. So console.log, and but your question is it clear to you now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so the code doesn't get executed because we console.logged it. It gets executed because JavaScript read that line. So whether or not we outputted it, JavaScript still reads the line. You get the point. But what use is the code if we don't output it to see what we are getting? So basically, we have something like this now. So now you can see that we actually have a function here that can actually add the price of two things together and then give us an output, right? And whenever we invoke that function, we get, the function gets executed, then we get what we are adding together, the value we are adding together. So we see this is one value, this is another value, then a combination of two of them using the binary operator, the plus operator, actually outputs a new value, which becomes our cost, and that's what we call it. We could have called it any other thing, but we decided to call it cost. So I said a function, the usefulness of a function basically is the fact that you should be able to use it anywhere in your program. And when you have a function like this, it's more like it is within a closed scope. And what that means is that the value that the function actually consumes comes from within the function. It cannot be accessed from outside the function. Neither can it be influenced by any other area of your code. I don't know if that makes sense to you. So one other thing we can decide to do is, and I'll show you this, and this might lead us to the other differences we have between the var and let keyword. So we have this now, and then we declare a variable here. Where we are declaring these two variables, is outside of the function, but yet we can still access it inside of the function. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
So we want to take this a step further. So instead of declaring our variables out here, we don't want to code, we don't want to hard code these variables out just anywhere. We want to be able to add this variable to our function anytime we want to use it. So we are not just confined to 20 and 40. We want to be able to use this function over and over to calculate not just 20 and 40. We want to be able to use it to add any two number, as long as we need to create and perform an addition operation. Maybe add the cost of a car and the cost of another car, or add two people's age together. So we don't want to be confined to just these two numbers. So that introduces us to the concept of function parameters. So a function parameter is basically what you can pass into this parenthesis, because this parenthesis is not just a waste of real estate on your screen. It's basically a useful tool for you to be able to make your functions more dynamic. So what we can do is we can decide to pass these variables directly into the function itself. So we can do price X and price Y inside of that parenthesis. But when we save now, we get a problem because we didn't define any of those variables. Price X and price Y are both not defined. So where do we get to define these two variables that we decided to initialize with our function, initialize our function with? What we'll do basically in these cases, whenever we are invoking the function, we are obliged to pass in these two these two variables, and this time we are not going to be passing them as parameters. We are going to be passing them as arguments, as real values. So in this case, we just do 20 and 40, and when I save this, price Y, what's that? Oh, I said
It's not
price X
working
and price
because
X.
you wrote,
Yeah, so we still have 60, and if I decide to remove this, we get none, right? Because this is not a number, this is not a number, these are both undefined. So we are adding undefined to undefined. So just to be able to just to be sure that is, let me also show you the fact that you can actually have more than one value logged out into your console. So we can decide to log const price X and price Y at the same time. And when I save that, you can actually see that we get none, not a number, undefined. So basically what we are doing here is adding undefined to undefined. So it is rubbish. So we don't get anything meaningful out of our program. So here we actually come here and add real numbers to our function, and this should extend beyond 20 and 40. So for you to see the power of functions, so I can copy this line a couple of more times and decide to add 80 and 40 here, and here I decide to add 20 and 90. So when I save, I actually get the value of those three. You get the point? So now I have just one block of code, and I'm using it to do many other things, and I can access this in any other part of my program. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so that's what a function is basically in a nutshell. Is there any question from anybody? And I hope we are still streaming. Okay, I think we are.
So I want to ask, this function, is it limited to just numbers? Because initially when you put price X and then price Y, so and then you put func name as 2040, so I was already thinking like, oh, what if I want to add on that numbers? But I saw that you were able to add other numbers, like input other numbers, and it still brought out the answer for those other numbers.
Yeah.
So my question is, the func name now, is it, or this function, is it, would I call it an operator now? Is it limited to just like arithmetic data, or I don't
Definitely
know?
not. Definitely not.
Have other
So
data
we can actually decide to do things like, okay, I don't want to go too complex. So we can even decide to add more parameters. For instance, we can decide to add price Z, sorry, price Z. And maybe we are not using price Z, and we won't get any error because we are not actually using price Z. We are not trying to use it. So instead of doing const, maybe adding the price together, so let's just decide to do something else. So let's come down here. So instead of console, doing a console.log of this, so let's just say, okay, and I want to use backticks. You remember backticks, right? I said this is used for string interpolation, right? And it's because using
Yes.
using quotation signs is actually harder to type. So I think this is easier to type because having to do string and plus and that and that. But I understand what you understand the difference between me doing something like this. My toothbrush cost, and I do plus price. You understand what this means, right? So when I console.log this, is going to my toothbrush cost what, 2080 you get. So price X is basically, let's say, the price of toothbrush. So let's kind of modify our function and say toothbrush, right? Let's say toothpaste, and let's say bottled water. And maybe let's just use an appropriate naming convention. So let me just change this to camel casing, so you don't learn bad thing from me. So let me do this. So instead of price, so price X and Y will be undefined at the moment. So let's just change this to toothbrush, and then let's change this to toothpaste. No, okay, toothbrush plus toothpaste. You get it. And then bottled water. We are now actually using bottled water here, so let's say toothbrush, and everything should work the same. So what we're going to do, I want to use backticks. I don't want to use this, and start getting familiar with backticks because it is more modern than string concatenation, which is what I just did. So I'm going to say my toothbrush costs, and I'll do what's it called, toothbrush, while and I can even decide to go up, and I put the dollar sign in front of it. While my toothpaste, and I think I need to stop very soon. I'm actually very tired and I'm feeling some aches on my back. Toothpaste, and toothpaste, and my toothpaste. While my toothpaste, while the cost of my toothpaste is, oh, what am I doing? English down. Is okay, toothpaste. However, I heard that what's it called? A bottle water costs. So that makes sense. So you can see, so I see my toothbrush costs $20, while the cost of my toothpaste is $40. However, either a bottle of water costs undefined. So basically, we are not adding that third value anywhere here, right? So let's say 200, and let us just add the dollar sign to make it fancy. Full. So let's say 500. So this one is buying it in he's buying it in Mega Mall, so his own is more expensive. Meanwhile, this one went to where's the other place where they sell crazily expensive things. So my toothbrush costs $20, while the cost of my toothpaste is $40. However, so you can actually see that it's not just limited to numbers, and here I can even decide to kind of add more parameters. So I can decide to okay, let me just define another function. So let's just keep this one to just one instance. So let me define another function and say function, and remember the keyword is very important, and let's say sentence creator. So this is going to be just our small program that creates random sentence for us. So let's say we have a noun, we have a verb, and then we have an adjective, right? So I can decide to say console.log And then using backticks, I can say my name is, and I decide to do name, noun rather, and I love to, and I do verb because it is so, then I do adjective. You get the point?
Yes, sir. So you can, okay.
So I can say, I can now call this statement. I can see my Visual Studio Code actually, the moment I decide to invoke a function, it kind of just suggests to me the arguments I need to pass in. So you can see here we have a noun of type any, verb of type any, and adjective of type any. And any actually means, is because JavaScript is a dynamically typed language. So you can actually initialize a variable and store any kind of value you want. You don't have to declare the type of value together with the variable you are initializing, as against other languages like C, C++, and Java. So here we can say my name is, so I'll pass a string John Doe. I love to swim, and then my adjective is going to be fun. So see what happens. My name is John Doe. I love to swim because it is so fun. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, sir.
And I can hear the smile in someone's ears. Don't worry, we are getting there. So we have Jane Doe. We can say skate. So I have no idea if skating is relaxing, but anyhow. So my name is Big Joe, and I love to. I was going to write gamble. I thought somebody said gamble.
No, I said that.
Dance. Okay, it is so what?
Yes, and just
Okay, so you can see we actually have 3 instances of the same function, but we are actually using it for 2 different purposes. So you can see why you need functions in your program. So you might have a program that kind of add 2 numbers together, so that whenever you need to add 2 numbers together, you must not always say let x is this, let y be that, oh yeah, add x plus y. You can just call the function, pass in a proper argument, then you get your output. Does that make sense?
yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so the common way of actually logging something out of the console is basically to not just use console.log, because most of the time your users will not be checking your console. Most times you might want to write it in your document, so you might want to do something like document.write. This is just my two problem, but you might want to write it on your page. You might also want to return it, which is what I was going to come to the other time. So you might want to return what you did, and return is how you actually return value out of a function. So in JavaScript, if you don't actually return anything from your value, if you console.log your function, is going to return undefined. Does that make sense? So you will see my func name now, and let me just remove this instance of this other one. So if I do console.log this function here, which is not a crime to do, it's actually okay to do that. Console.log this. What is that? Okay, there's something wrong somewhere. Okay, I have a comma. So you can see that I did a console.log, and you see I still get the same output. I console.log my function. I didn't just invoke it. So line 276 still gives me the same output, and that's because of this return keyword. If I should do the same console.log to this, guess what I'm going to get? Console.log. I get undefined. So in order for you to be able to get a value out of you, and you can see that our function still ran all the same, like 271 was that. So it still ran this code, just that the console.log did not could not evaluate to anything, because console.log expects a real value, and in order for you to get a real value out of the invocation of a function, you have to return that value from your function. Does that make sense? So I have to
Please come again. Sorry.
So when you do console.log, basically console.log expects a value, right? It expects data.
Yes.
It expects data. So if you do not return a value from your function when you invoke it, if you try to access the value, it will return undefined because you did not return. By default, JavaScript will return undefined when you invoke a function. So initially we've just been doing console.log. We've not really tried to access the data that the function returns. Does that make sense? Because this is not the only thing we can actually use a function to do. Does that make sense? So I can have, do you understand it now? If you don't understand, I can go over it again.
So this so line 271, it reads it out as my name is John Doe and I love to swim because it's so fun.
Yeah.
And it's picking the data from the sentence creator, right? That's how it's able to get noun John Doe and verb swim and all that.
Yeah.
But how come in 277 it's saying undefined? That's where I'm confused.
Okay. So basically,
because it basically contains the same thing, doesn't it?
So what we have here is that the return keyword is the difference. So in JavaScript, if you don't return anything, the default return from your function, who is that? The default return from your function is going to be undefined. You get the point? So you have to explicitly return something from your function. If not, whenever you try to access the value that, because whenever you invoke your function, console.log is expecting a value. It would have been fine if you just called your function without putting it in console.log. You won't get any undefined, right? But whenever you do console.log is expecting to output something. And it cannot resolve anything from your function because your function does not return anything. So the return keyword is how the function actually resolves and consolidates into one value, and that value is what you can now access whenever you need a data that function produces. Does that make sense? But not all functions should return something. Some functions can just do many other things. They shouldn't always return something. But whenever you need your function to access whatever your function is going to output eventually. Okay, for instance, let's see, and let me just to explain this further because I think this is the way I get to explain this. So let me say I have a function and the function is add, and add actually just takes two numbers. So it takes A and B. So what it does is it just adds, it returns A plus B, right? So here I can have another variable here. I can have something like let salary equal 20, right? So I can do console.log. I can do console.log salary plus add 2 and 3. And you can see we have 25. Does that make sense? So yes, we actually used a function to resolve down to a single value. And that's only possible because of the return keyword. If I should remove the return keyword, the function does not return anything. I would get none because in as much as there's value here, but the function did not return it. And if I try to use the return value, when I call a function like this and I try to access it in this manner, the program expects that data will be returned from the function. And if it is not returned, it will result to undefined. Do you get the point?
Yes, sir. So if, for instance, in the sentence creator, if we remove console.log and put return in front of my name is noun and I love to, so it will read this console.log that carries sentence creator.
Yeah, we won't get any undefined. I just did the two of them differently so that I can see the difference. So if I come here now and then do this, you'll see that you get it. You get 271. Did we do anything? 275. Okay, this is it. So you can see it's no longer undefined. Instead, it gave us the return value. So most times in your function, you want to return something. And if you are not returning something, that means you are performing something. There's another use case for your function. It's not necessary to return a value. But there are some helper functions like this addition. Now you might want to have a function that just adds things together. So it is appropriate for you to have a return value on that kind of function. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so just for us to be able to you know, and I think this where we actually draw the curtain to net. I'll just show you the other keyword that we use to, you know, write a function. So the other keyword, sorry, the other way to write a function. So basically this is the legacy way of writing a function. The function keyword, then the function name, the parentheses, then you pass in any parameter if any, then you have your, you know, curly braces. I remember when I was telling you about objects and curly braces, I told you that in functions you also use curly braces, you know. Does that make sense? So okay, so that's it. So okay, I just want to show you the other keyword for the other way of declaring functions. So in order for us to drive this home, I will just do something quick. So I'm going to kind of consolidate the various things we've learned so far into one, you know, one small program, and let us see how that works. So what we are going to do here is we are going to declare another function, and that other function is going to be declared with the const keyword, and we're going to say get salary, and we use the equal sign, and we use this, the parentheses, and we use the arrow syntax, then we open a bracket. So this is another way of declaring a function. So they call them arrow functions. And then it's also possible to declare a function without a name. You know, it's very possible to do that, but let me not go into all of that yet, but we'll go into that much later. So you can declare a function without a name. They call them anonymous functions. So you can also research around that. So this is an arrow function, and then what we are going to do here basically is to, you know, we are going to get income and tax. Okay, so we are going to, instead of get salary, let's just say get net worth, right? So what we are going to do is net worth is supposed to be what? Income minus tax, right? So we just return a simple thing. We are going to say income minus tax. So that makes sense. So what we're going to do here, and now we are not logging anything to the console. So we just want to create a user profile. So we're going to say const user equals, and it's an object basically. So we're going to say name. We're going to say John Doe. And we're going to say occupation. And we're going to say occupation is fisherman. We write fisherman together or separate, anyhow. So, and then we're going to say children, and you know we have red line here because we already declared the user somewhere in the program. You know we have a user at the top, right? So let's just call this profile. So let's say children, and children is going to be an array, and then let's just try to do something stylish and make it an array of objects. So we're going to say position, we're going to say first child, and we're going to say what's it called, name Katie Doe. I'm going to say age 7, immunize, true. So you get the point. So just to save you from like to skip the boring part of having to write all of these things, let me just copy this one more time, and I'm trying to make this to be, you know, I know the big what's it called, the larger I make it, the more complex it will be for you to read it. So let me just try and keep it simple. So I'll just add one more here, and let me just copy and paste this one more. So that will be, so he has one child, so this one's going to be second child, and I think it's standard to have gender, right? So let's say here, let's say false. So gender male. Okay, I didn't put a. So we have the name of the man, John Doe. He has children, 2 children, and the 2 children have actually the children is an array of 2 objects. So 2 children basically, So we can say married. So we say married is true. So we can decide to add spouse, or let's not make it too big a big. So that's fine. So it's just like a demonstration. So we're going to say salary or income. Income is going to be, what's it called? Income is let's say 5,000. So let's say 5,000 pounds, and tax is going to be 200. Then we are going to say okay, that's just it basically. So okay, I want to see if I've exhausted most of it. Okay, then we're not going to say net worth, right? So net worth is where we're going to do what's interesting. So net worth, we are actually going to, here we've been having key value pair of primitive type. So here we're going to do something. We're going to say get net worth, and get net worth is going to be our, the way we calculate the net worth. So basically here now, what we have here is basically a method. You get the point? So we have so we have income tax, and we can actually declare this function here. Even we don't have to go and declare it out there. We can declare here, but let's just keep it the way it is. And it's very important that it's an arrow function as well. So income is this dot income, while tax, sorry, is this dot tax. So let's see how that goes. So let's do console.log. So let's see what we have in our console now. So you can see we have what's our net worth? Okay, net worth says none. So why do we have none? Why do we have none? So trying to find out why 200 plus 5. So let me just do a console.log inside of the function itself. So it says undefined. So maybe I don't really need this keyword. Just we are within income is, so definitely we need this. So undefined. Okay, I think that's because of the scope that we are using to declare the variable basically. So there's something called what's it called, lexical scoping. So I think that's what is coming to play, and I don't want to get into all that complexity yet. So basically this keyword, which I'm sure that many of you will have a question about this keyword already, because in this context the key is supposed to, this is referring to this particular object here, but I don't want to complicate things as such. So what I will just do here is I will just I just want to declare a function here, and the function is going to basically is going to add this. So it's going to return the value of this dot income plus and I hope I get the feedback. So basically what you want to do is this. So the net worth is a function. Net worth is a function basically. So what you normally do is, if I come to my console and I say, what's that called? I say profile.name. It's going to console log the name of the profile. So I can come here and say profile.networth. Sorry, and let me just call that because it's a function. So you can see it gave me 5,200, and am I adding? Okay, I added instead of subtracting. So I don't want to complicate this, but I'm actually letting you know that okay, the same way we can access using the dot notation different properties of an object using the dot notation. Yeah, so we can also access a particular property that is not necessarily a primitive type, but instead it is a function, and that function will return something based on the value we pass into it. So here we are accessing the net worth, and the net worth is not a regular data type. It is basically a function. but it resolves into one value, and it uses other parts of the object to calculate the user's net worth. And that's what we are trying to this is just a small demonstration. So basically what we are our emphasis is basically on the user's net worth, and we are able to calculate that using a method. So this is what a method is basically. So an object, which is this profile, denoted by these curly braces at the beginning and the end, will have properties inside of it, and all of these are properties. The children is a property. So this property will always be in key value pair, and I'm repeating that again. There is a key on the left hand side and the value is on the right hand side, and the way you access the value of that object is that you use the dot notation. So you can do something like profile dot the key, then it will return the value, just like when I did profile dot name, it returned John Doe. So in a case where you actually have the value of a property being a function, it is referred to as a method. It is no longer what's it called? It is no longer a regular key value pair in that case. It is now a what? It is a method. So the net worth is actually a method under the profile object. So when I say there are methods, string methods, array methods, object methods, what I mean is that these data types actually have properties, and this property that we refer to as method is basically a function type. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now you can see I can go back here and then open my object in totality, and you can see that here we have network, and a network is basically what? Just a function. Then I can invoke it to do whatever it is I want to do on that. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I can see that it also has its own prototype and so on, just like the other methods and so on. So that's it basically. So I think we should stop here. I'm also very tired myself, and I don't want to start losing my thoughts, because that's going to start happening eventually. So I think this is the point where we actually just say good night to one another. So if there's any question, please feel free to ask me now. So and I'm ending the stream now basically, if it has not already ended.